All right, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Around the Octagon. UFC 312 is right around the corner. We have an interesting card coming up. I am joined today by Ryan and Son. How are we doing today, boys?
Doing
Not
good.
too shabby.
Doing good.
Not too shabby.
So we'll kick it off with some fight news, although there's not been too much since the last time we met. Pantoja versus Kaikar of France has not been officially announced, I don't believe yet, but that is rumored for UFC 314 as the co-main. Ryan, I want to hear your opinions on this fight. Can you see Kaikar of France dethroning Pantoja?
I don't know, man. Kai has something about him, a little bit of a dog. He has that dog mentality. I mean, goes out, knocks out Steve Erceg. Gave Amir Albazi a good fight. I thought he got robbed in that fight. But I don't know, man. Pantoja is just a different beast at that weight class. So another tough hill to climb for Kai. But I'm happy to see that he is getting his title shot.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is cool to see him getting that shot. There really isn't anybody left for Pantoja to fight. He's kind of just cleared out that division altogether. I don't see Kai having a chance in this fight, honestly. When I see Pantoja defending that belt, I get the same feeling as like Anderson Silva's defending his belt, or as Adesanya when he was on his title run. Like or Demetrius Johnson for that matter. Like I have a very tough time seeing him lose a fight as a champion. Until the day it happens, I'm not going to root against them.
Yeah, Pantoja's just been on such a roll recently, man. He's been such a dominant champ. And the thing about this matchup is that he has such a damn good chin that I don't see Kaikar France putting him out, and I don't see Kaikar France beating him by decision in a 5-rounder. I know they have fought before. I think they met in the semifinals of the Ultimate Fighter way back when they were both, trying to get into the UFC, and Pantoja squeaked out a close one there. But yeah, I think Pantoja is on a different level right now as the champ, and I also see him getting the job done there and retaining that belt. Next up, we have the main event for that fight, which was rumored to be Volk versus Ilia, is reportedly off, and now the Islam rumor is being thrown around for that fight. Personally, I just don't see that happening. Islam will be coming off of Ramadan at that point, won't have time for a full camp, and I don't see him risking his belt against Ilia coming up when he doesn't have a chance for a full camp and to be at full strength. So I don't see that happening. Maybe Volk Ilia will be back on. We shall see. But yeah, let's kick it off into this card. To start us off on the early prelims, we have Hyun-Sung Park at -240 versus Naim Jargal Tumendelger at +195. I might have messed that one up. So if you are listening, Naim Jargal, please do not get too mad at me.
Means a commentator's worst nightmare, eh?
Yeah. That's one of those ones where Buffer and the announcers will have to get the written out pronunciation to get that one right. But Park is coming in at 9-0, while being 1-0 in the UFC after winning Road to the UFC to get in, versus Tumendelger, who is 8-1 while being 0-1 in the UFC. While he does hold a 5-inch reach advantage. Son, we'll kick it off with you. I don't know if you have much insight into this fight, but let's hear what you think.
Yeah, I kind of have this rule of thumb when it comes to the UFC, especially with the early prelims. If I can't pronounce his name or even begin to fathom the idea of pronouncing his name, I'm just going to root for him and just say they're going to win. I think this just comes down to a hiring thing. If I was Dana White, I'm not going to give my announcers some random early prelim guy some crazy name to say just as a test. I'm going to sign him if I think he's good. And that's exactly what I think is going to happen here. I didn't look too much into this fight, but, just at a glance, I'm going to go with the other guy.
Yeah, I pretty much can't disagree with that logic, especially just considering I think like every road to UFC guy we've seen has been fraud checked within 1 or 2 fights, and this will be Hyun-Sung Park's second fight, and I just don't see any of these guys really going far at this point. I mean, you had Anshul Jubli, who's on this card too, loses his UFC debut to Mike Breeden, and I don't know. I just can't trust to pick these guys in fights. So, give me an Argyle tumor ball.
Yeah, geez, I guess all three of us have the upset here. I think that 5-inch reach advantage is pretty massive. Both guys seem to be well-rounded mixed martial artists. Both seem to have the ability to switch it up with the takedowns. Their striking output seem pretty similar. So with that being said, if you're able to sit at range 5 inches, snap some jabs across. I just saw that Tumendelger is also from Mongolia, so that's pretty cool. Get the Mongolian crowd behind him. But yeah, I'm going to go Tumendelger here as well. I'm going to have him pulling off the upset. I like the plus money with that big of reach advantage and similar styles. Next, we will move on to Quaran Salkild versus Anshul Jubli, who Ryan just touched on. Salkild is the minus 650 favorite, while the 25-year-old is making his UFC debut. He just came off an impressive Dana White Contender Series win versus Jubli, 7-1 while being 1-1 in the UFC. Ryan, we'll start this one off with you. Yeah, I know you kind of just touched on this, but let's.
Yeah, I think you know where I'm going with this one. Although I think looking at it now, Scalid's a minus 650 favorite. I don't think that should ever be the case. Like Son brought up in the last pod, you have guys minus 500, minus 1,000. But yeah, like Anshul Jubli made his debut in UAE fight card, lost to Mike Breeden in the third, got knocked out, and it was basically just the pressure and the fact that Mike Breeden started barking at him that really put him away. And Mike Breeden's been cut from the UFC. He was on a 0-3. He was like 0-3 at that time in the UFC, then went 1-3 and then got cut. And like I said, with the road to UFC guys, I just can't trust them to win fights. Eventually, all of them either get fraud checked. I know it already happened to Anshul Jubli, and give me the Aussie at home.
Yeah, I agree here. Definitely glad you brought up that point about the odds there. I was waiting for the opportunity to bring up that Peyton Talbot loss. I mean, what was he, minus 1,100? Brutal for all of us. Don't have to bring it up anymore. But, odds like that should never exist. They definitely, especially in the early prelims, that's just ridiculous. But on top of the odds and just his record and his skills, I am going with Quillen because he's got a gnarly stash on him. That dude's got a sick handlebar on his face, and style points count for everything. And I'll definitely be taking his side in this fight.
Yeah. Who knew Peyton Talbot couldn't wrestle?
Yeah, right.
Steve, that was brutal. If we're circling back to Talbot, I don't want to necessarily say fraud checked because he does have a lot of time and age and whatnot to improve. But yeah, no, that was kind of the definition of a fraud check a little bit. Wow, that was shocking. But back to this prelim. Yeah, I mean, Quillen, while holding a 6-inch reach advantage, he also mixes in the wrestling extremely well. You should be able to control range, and you should be able to control where this fight takes place. So with that being said, I don't really see where Jubli's path to victory is. So I'm going to go Quillen here. Method unknown. But yeah, give me Quillen money line. I don't know if I would throw it in a parlay at these odds, but I mean, maybe we should do something that I say not to, given how I've been going recently. But next up, we have Rong Zhu coming in at plus 180 versus Cody Steele at minus 220. Rong Zhu is 25-6 in his career, while being 0-1 in the UFC. He just experienced that doctor stoppage loss not too long ago against Cody Steele, who is making his UFC debut after an impressive Dana White Contender Series win. Steele seems to be a pretty highly touted prospect from Fury FC. So I'm excited to see this fight. Son, we'll kick it off with you. You have any insight to add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Cody Steele. I follow him on Instagram. I think the dude's sick. A few months ago, I caught a clip of him training. And not only that, but his last fight, I caught a few clips of that. Immediate fan. Do I think he's the next biggest thing, the UFC champion by the end of the year? No. But I do think he's a very exciting prospect. And, debut, I think they're just going to feed him a few cans to start with. He's kind of proven already he's really good. People know he's really good. There's a lot of footage on him. So definitely getting backed up in the film and everything. I'm taking Cody Steele for sure.
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I just think this fight's going to come down. It's going to be very close. Like looking at Rong Zhu, he's 24 years old with over 30 fights. I mean, you can't really buy that experience, especially at that young of an age. I do think Cody Steele's the better fighter, but a lot to work with there, just in terms of octagon experience and fight experience. Definitely goes Rong Zhu's way. But I think Cody Steele's a big enough prospect to get this one done and find a win.
Yeah, I think Cody Steele also does a very good job of mixing up his striking to the body, to the head, and where he's attacking. And I think we saw that in his Dana White Contender Series spot, how often he went after the body, and we saw that paying dividends as he was able to get the finish, going to the body there. I like what I saw out of Steele in that Dana White Contender Series fight. And to be honest, I just don't like what I saw out of Rong in that his last fight against Chris Padilla. I think we talked about him on that pod, and we were like, yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. This guy has 30 professional fights, making his UFC debut at 24. I like the experience he had going in, but kind of looked a little shell shocked there for a second, stepping into the UFC. So I don't know exactly where Rong is at himself either, but I do like Steele. And at minus 220, I have no problem throwing that in a parlay or even potentially taking it straight. I will have to look into that more, but yeah, I like Steele as well. All right, next up, we have Jonathan Mikalev at plus 210 versus Kevin Jousset at minus 260. Mikalev is 7-1, again, making his UFC debut. We have a lot of those on this card, and he is also a Dana White Contender Series guy. We have a lot of those on the card as well. Opposing Jousset, who is 10-3 while being 2-1 in the UFC. Most recently was finished by Brian Battle in France. I think we've all have heard that post-fight interview by Brian Battle, so that kind of knocked Jousset down a little bit. But Ryan, do you see the Frenchman being able to rebound here and get a win?
I like Mikalev in this one. He's making his UFC debut. He can mix in the takedowns. And I feel like Jousset exposed, like Brian Battle exposed Jousset. In fact, if you just keep a constant pressure and mix in the takedowns, keep that fight up against the cage, you can find a finish, or at least ride it out to a pretty comfortable decision.
Yeah, I'm going the opposite direction here. I think Kevin bounces back here. Jousset, you are right. I agree. I mean, Brian Battle did expose Jousset last fight. He showed that weakness, which was putting the pressure on. But as a UFC debutant, I don't think Jonathan is going to be able to put that pressure on. At least he's not going to have the confidence to put that pressure on, especially with a guy that has experience as Kevin has. And again, I mean, Jonathan is not Brian Battle. I guess to reinforce my point, I think Brian Battle is on a very different level than these guys fighting at this part of the card. I don't expect Jonathan to be able to bring that pressure to finish or edge out the win against Jousset.
Yeah, I was really up in the air on this one. I know Jousset is definitely able to compete in the UFC. He's shown that. He's won a couple fights in the UFC. That Brian Battle fight was just like such an air out of the tires moment in front of your home crowd. You're kind of in a position to beat a guy who has somewhat of a name with a big mouth and obviously was unable to do so. I don't think he necessarily looked terrible in the first round of that fight. Second round was, that got ugly quick. But Mikalev does do a good job of mixing in the wrestling from what I've seen. I think he finished his Dana White Contender Series fight via triangle. And I know Kevin himself does have some offensive wrestling in his game too. So it does not seem like Jonathan Mikalev here is scared to be on his back. We've seen him get a finish from a position like that. I don't hate the plus 210 play from the underdog here, but I would go Kevin Jousset getting the job done against the guy making his debut. It seems like, pay-per-view card, lights will be bright, but he is in front of his home crowd in Australia. So I don't hate throwing the plus money on this fight. All right, moving on. We have Colby Thicknesse at plus 300 versus Alexandre Topuria at minus 400. Thicknesse is 7-0 while making his UFC debut, opposed to Topuria, the older brother of Ilia, who is 5-1, also making his UFC debut. This should be a fun one, seeing Volk and Ilia in opposing corners here. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this fight?
Dude, I don't know, man. When I think of like brothers in the UFC, I think of Herbert Burns, and then I think of Muhammad Usman. Both guys just kind of got brought down to earth. I mean, like, I'm looking at the records of some of the guys that Topuria's brothers beat: 0-2, 0-5, 0-1, 0-2. So
Didn't beat anyone.
He's fought. The only guy he's lost to is 1-0, and everything in my head's telling me pick the other guy. But I'm going to be an idiot, and I'm going to take Topuria because I like the name, I like his brother, and he's going to be in his corner. Now you just said that Volk's going to be in the other guy's corner. this is like, it's one of those, it's like you don't have enough to like look at when it comes to Alexander Topuria to see, how good he actually is. He hasn't been tested at all in his career, but I guess I'm going with him, dude. We'll see if that Topuria name just holds that power.
I'm splitting it to the other side again, Ryan.
Thank you.
You look at the odds here. You really want to bet Topuria, or you might not even want to touch this fight. But I'm liking Colby here. One, because his last name's fucking hilarious. His nickname is Slickness, so it's Colby Slickness Thickness, which I think is fucking ridiculous. And I, again, fuck with the style points. But also, to add to that point, Topuria has fought, kind of cans to get that 5-1 record. And Colby is a champion in the Hex Fight Series. He is, it's not an absurdly good or well-renowned, fight promotion, MMA promotion, but being a champion is being a champion. And he is pretty well-rounded. He brings it to the ground. He's got some decision. He's got some KO. He's got some submission wins. He seems like a pretty decently rounded out fighter at the level that they're fighting here. And I think, with Volk in his corner, it's kind of like a little revenge thing against Topuria. I think he's really, probably, I wouldn't doubt, and given that he is in his corner, he's probably been in camp this whole time with him. They've probably been training together for a while. And I think Volk gets a win back here by way of coaching. I'm going Thickness here with the Slickness.
Yeah, I mean, both these guys have really fought cans, so it is weird, like looking at their track record and seeing who they fought. Like, you don't have much to go off there. I think the odds are just skewed so heavily in Topuria's favor because his last name is Topuria. Like minus 400 seems like a little bit of a stretch. So I like the value here for Colby, but I will say, like, I've seen clips of Topuria moving, and he moves like his brother. He throws his strikes like his brother, at least in the clips I see online. And he is a BJJ black belt as well. I think him and Ilia are like the only two black belts from Georgia, I believe. So, he is well-versed in mixed martial arts. So I will give the nod to Topuria. I made my mistakes of fading that last name, and I don't want to do it again. But these odds seem too steep for two guys with similar track records, both making their UFC debuts. All right, moving on. Next up, we have Wang Kong at minus 525 versus Bruna Brazil at plus 360. Kong is 6-1 while being 1-1 in the UFC, opposed to Brazil, who is 10-4-1 while being 2-2 in the UFC. Son, we'll kick it off with you. Are you riding Brazil from Brazil?
I hate to say it, but no, I'm not. I'm going with Wang here. I hate rooting against my Brazilians. I want her to win. She's got a sick name too, style points, everything. She's got everything. But given that Zhang Weili is on this card, I see, maybe it's just a dumb coincidence or maybe it's a correct pattern recognition. But sometimes when you got a really strong fighter that's expected to win at the top of the card, you have someone that's, related from the same country, kind of bringing attention to the same fighter, maybe to bring the views up or whatever it may be, for people watching from that country. This does happen a bit, and I am going to take Wang Kong here. Is it going to be super convincing? Is it going to be a banger of the night? Probably not, but I do think it's going to be a decent fight from her, and she'll be able to get that win.
Yeah, Son, I agree with you. I think if Wang Kong just stays outside the pocket, just tit for tat strikes, she should comfortably win this fight. I think she learned a lot from getting subbed in her last fight and getting knocked down, just trying to play that power puncher game. So I think we'll see some pretty decent improvements from Wang Kong here.
Yeah, and one thing to note here is how much higher Kong's output is than Brazil. Kong's averaging 5.81 significant strikes per minute, opposed to Brazil, who's averaging a little bit under 3. So with Kong's output, I think that will pose problems to Brazil. And I do trust that she has learned her lesson from her last fight and will outstrike her way to a victory here. But if you're a guy that likes to go in and bet every single fight and you're like, I need to have some action on it, I wouldn't hate throwing like a quarter unit on Brazil sub maybe for a long shot. But yeah, it's about all I got for that one. Moving on to the next fight, we have Tom Nolan at plus 115 versus Vyacheslav Borshev at minus 135. Nolan is 8-1 while being 2-1 in the UFC, opposed to Borshev, who's 8-4-1 while being 3-3-1 in the UFC. Ryan, we'll kick it off with you. Are you riding Tom Nolan here in his home country?
Yeah, I'm riding the Aussie in his home country. Borshev, while exciting in fights, got demolished by Chase Hooper. And no one, I don't think anyone saw that coming. And ever since then, it's just like I feel like we're starting to see like a downward skid on Borshev. Split decision win against Lontop after that. No slouch, but I don't know. I think we've seen the best out of Borshev.
Yeah, just not to contradict myself, I'm going to try and pronounce this guy's name, Vyacheslav Borshev. I can pronounce his name, so it's not an auto dub by the guy. I think Tom Nolan takes this one, the hometown boy. He's looked good. I think Borshev's like, 33? He's in his 30s. Tom's got a reach advantage on him. I think, the odds are just stacked in Tom Nolan's favor. Plus, he's got the home crowd. You know how Australia gets. It's going to be tough to take this one away from Tom.
Yeah, I also like Nolan here as the underdog play. That fight with Chase Hooper, I think, spoke volume. Getting the knockdown against Borshev kind of really took Borshev a notch down in my eyes. I know he was supposed to be a pretty highly touted striker. I know he has some accolades there. Isn't he like a kickboxing high accolades and some kickbox? I forget exactly what it was, but this will be a striker's duel. I don't think there's any secret about that. And Nolan does hold a decent reach advantage here. So I'm going to go with Nolan's youth and his 4-inch reach advantage. Get him some momentum. And Borshev's going to be ready to start getting off the show somewhat soon. Next up, we have a fellow Aussie and Jack Jenkins at plus 190 versus Gabriel Santos at minus 235. Jenkins is 13-3 while being 3-1 in the UFC, while Santos is 11-2, being 1-2 in the UFC. San, we'll kick it off with you here. Are you riding Santos or Jenkins on this one?
I'm going to redeem myself for going against Brazil earlier. I'm going Gabriel Santos here. He does have the reach advantage. He's a younger guy, not by much, but younger. Not a crazy difference. The odds are pretty fair here. Not a huge difference in reach, in height and things like that, or age for that matter. But I do think Gabriel comes in here and gets the win. He does have 2 losses in the UFC, which is, one of them was a knockout. The other one was decision, but he was able to get 2 good wins out of that. Out of his UFC experience as well. So I don't know. This one really a toss up. Like the odds are, like I said, pretty fair on this one. I'm just gonna go Gabriel Santos to save my skin for going against Brazil the last time.
No, so I gotta agree with you. I like the guy 2-inch reach advantage. A couple of years younger, a little bit faster, lighter. I think he's just hungrier. He's looking for that win in the UFC, and now's the time to do it.
Yeah, this is another situation here where both guys do mix it up very well. But actually, one second, before I get into that, I do find it a little weird with this fight being in Australia, how many Australians we see as underdogs on this card. Usually when the card's hosted in whatever country, you'd see most of the countrymen being favorites. So this is one of the rare times where you see a lot of underdogs coming out of that home country. But back to the fight. Like I was saying, both guys do mix it up very well here. Both the guys have similar outputs. I like Santos' submission threat. Jenkins has been subbed a few times, and while Santos does have those 2 UFC losses, they are to Lerone Murphy and David Onama, who are both no joke. Lerone Murphy in his last fight just went out there and beat someone pretty solid himself. So I like the threat of Santos' submission here. I'm taking him via sub. Moving on, we have Jake Matthews at minus 240 versus Francisco Prado at plus 195. Matthews is 20-7 with a lengthy UFC career, being 13-7, opposed to Prado, who is 12-2 while being 1-2 in the UFC. Ryan, we'll kick it off with you here. Can you see the 22-year-old Prado making this fight close, and can you see him getting the win?
I can see him getting the win. Not getting the win. I can see him making the fight close, but I think in your home country, with the experience that Jake Matthews has, and he's put on some sick performances before, knocked out Andre Fialho. He looked good there. Had a little bit of a skid, but he's coming back, and he just beat Phil Rowe, UD, and I like the guy with the veteranship here.
Yeah, I agree with you here. I'm definitely taking the Australian here. He's a decent fighter. Obviously, he's had some losses recently. I just think it's really tough to come in at 22 years old and expect to win. Especially in the UFC. Jake Matthews isn't a superstar or a massive favorite in this fight. But I think, like you said, Ryan, the experience, the veteranship, I guess, that he has over the other guy is Francisco is just going to push him over the edge.
Yeah, I think it's extremely tough for a 22-year-old to go out in enemy territory, go out on the road and beat a guy who has 20 fights in the UFC. Like, being 22 going against a guy with 20 fights, that's just a crazy discrepancy in experience. And Matthews is very well-rounded himself as well. I was just looking at Prado's fighting style, and he's technically classified as a street fighter. So that's a little interesting. I don't know exactly what that entails. I guess a little bit of everything, but
I imagine.
Yeah, I do expect Matthews, being the bigger guy and the better grappler, I do expect him to be able to control the octagon more and switch it up at his will. So I see this as an opportunity for Australia to get a nice win. Given that they have some tough matchups here, I'm taking Matthews UD.
Yeah, I'm liking the Australian Bryce Mitchell here.
I don't know if we should mention Bryce Mitchell on this pod right now.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. Next up, we have Jimmy Crute making his return at plus 135 versus Rodolfo Bellato at minus 160. Crute is 12-4-1 while being 4-4-1 in the UFC, opposed to Bellato, who is 12-2 while being 1-0 in the UFC, who's also another former Dana White Contender Series guy. Son, we'll start it off with you here. Are you going with Crute or Bellato?
I'm going Bellato here. One, you look at the guy physiognomy-wise, this dude looks like a fucking beast, bro. From the shoulders down, he looks like Marvin Vittori. From the face up, he looks like fucking Shrek got ran over by a truck. So in a fighter, I love that. Not only that, but we do have the reach advantage. They are the same height, but, he does have a pretty decent reach advantage on him. These guys are the same age. Another, kind of a toss up for me. I don't see, a huge advantage going one way or the other, but, by way of ugliness and kind of fight style, I'm going Bellato here.
Yeah, son, I agree with you. I mean, you look at their last couple of fights, Jimmy Crute's been getting the shit kicked out of him pretty much every fucking fight. Now he's fought guys like Alonzo Menafield still. 2-fight KO streak for Bellato right in this one. I think he carries it back and finds another knockout. Also, dude, this is a horrible pay-per-view card. I'm kind of just looking at it now. I mean, Wang Suarez is sick. Du Plessis Strickland's good, but these other fights are kind of brutal. I don't know what you guys think about it, but
I will make the argument that we've been getting spoiled as of late with UFC matchups. I mean, in recent memory, the last few, main events, not main events, but, actual UFC events have been really good. Even the fight night, last weekend was really good. We got Adesanya. I mean, he did get knocked out, but we have been getting spoiled with really, really good cards. So it is weird going back to, I guess, like the normal, not as banger packed cards as we usually get, but I think we'll be surprised.
It seems like they like doing Strickland dirty a little bit with his pay-per-views, man.
Yeah,
I think it's put on these cards that just aren't very stacked. But I think also something that has to do with it is if you look at the upcoming fight nights, like next week you have Cannonier versus Rodriguez. Yeah, so that's a good one. Then you have Cejudo versus Song Yadong after that, and then even after that you have Royval versus Manel Cape. So they are making these fight nights, like they're putting good main events on, and that's kind of taken away from what we could have on this card. But yeah, back to this fight in particular. Bellato has gotten off to a hot start in the UFC with both knockouts in his debut and in his Contender Series fight. And Crute coming off a 1.5 year plus layoff, he's a little chinny, and Bellato throws high volume. So if Bellato is able to negate Crute's wrestling game and stay off the ground, I could see him getting another KO finish here. But all right, on to the next one. We have Justin Tafa at +115 versus Taliesin Teixeira at -135. Tafa is 7-4 while being 4-4 in the UFC, opposed to Teixeira, who is 7-0. Another Dana White Contender Series guy here, making his UFC debut. Before we get into it, I will note he does hold a 9-inch reach advantage. Ryan, we'll kick it off with you here. Do you see Teixeira getting the job done in his UFC debut?
I do. Like I said, this is another one that's surprising with the pay-per-view prospect of this card, just because you have a guy making his UFC debut at heavyweight, fighting in a pay-per-view event. I think the 9-inch reach advantage here will play the biggest part in that fight, and I see him finding Justin Tafa's chin and sleeping him cold, unfortunately, in front of his home crowd in Australia.
I'm going Teixeira here, man. I think he's a very exciting prospect. He's got a really good record, just keeping it clean. The reach advantage is massive, and it's not only a reach advantage. This dude's like half a foot taller than him too. At heavyweight, that's massive numbers. That's screaming a knockout for Teixeira here. Obviously, Tafa's got the veteranship on him. But in general, I think the Tafa brothers have been getting smoked recently, and I don't think that loss train's kind of coming to an end anytime soon, especially with this fight on the horizon. I'm going to share here, and I would almost sprinkle in. I would almost guarantee you a knockout here.
Yeah, most likely round one too. If I had to say, like round one, someone's getting sucked in the first 5 minutes.
Definitely.
Yeah, I don't mind putting out Teixeira round one knockout as a little prop play here. Tafa's been underwhelming as of recent, to say the least. And you'd think with the UFC putting Teixeira this highly on the pay-per-view portion of the card, they have to think pretty highly of him. And they got to be hoping for a knockout here to get, the crowd into it leading into the two title fights. So I think this is a spot for Teixeira to get a knockout win, get some name, get the name going of the 25-year-old, put some momentum behind him, and get him moving on to bigger and better things. But next up, we will go to the co-main, a title fight. We have Zhang Weili as the slight underdog at -105 versus Tatiana Suarez at -115. Weili is 25-3 in her career while being 9-2 in the UFC. Both those losses coming to Rose Namajunas, opposed to Suarez, who is 11-0 while being 7-0 in the UFC. Ryan, we'll kick this one off with you. Are you going with Zhang Weili here to retain her belt?
I am. I mean, I really, besides Rose Namajunas, we haven't seen anyone beat Zhang Weili inside the octagon, and she looks better every fight she gets in, even especially for being 35 years old. It's impressive to see how much she grows in each and every one of her fights. And I think this is just one of those types of champions where I have to root for her, I have to pick her until I actually see someone beat her with my own two eyes. That being said, I think after this, if she does win, I'd like to see her try to move up, take that flyweight belt, but a lot left in her career. So.
Yeah, it's I agree 100%. I think it's Zhang Weili in my eyes. She's kind of I was making the Pantoja comparisons earlier with when you see a champion and you have a really tough time seeing them lose that belt. Zhang Weili is one of those fighters. Probably until the day I die, I will never root against her in a fight, just because it's so tough to beat her. When she can pick up a 300-pound Francis Ngannou with ease, I think the last thing she's worried about is a 5'4", 115-pound lady. And we're going to see that on Saturday. Zhang Weili by a mile.
Yeah, dude, even odds is actually wild here. Get your value like you can.
I think it's just the momentum, honestly, and that's kind of evening out the odds. But Zhang is just unbelievable.
Yeah, I'm seeing Weili at even odds right now and Suarez at minus 120. So it's even shifted a little bit since I, took my notes down. And one of the things that I have written in here is that I kind of think that the odds are going to shift in Weili's favor as it gets closer to the fight. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I like getting the value out of Weili right now. I know Suarez is on one hell of a run, but it just feels disrespectful having the champ as the underdog here, just given how dominant her last performances have been. Like, it's just weird to see a dominant champ not as the favorite. So I like the value out of Weili right now. I would get the champ at plus money now while you can. And I'm also riding Zhang Weili. I know Suarez should hold the wrestling advantage, but Weili, she is a solid ground game as well. And on the feet, she's not one to mess with. So I see her winning the exchanges on the feet. If she can negate Suarez's wrestling, I can see her really picking up momentum in those later rounds as well and putting a beating down on Tatiana Suarez. All right, moving on to our main event of the evening. We have Dricus Du Plessis at minus 210 against Sean Strickland at plus 175. DDP has a professional record of 22-2 while being 8-0 in the UFC, opposed to Strickland, who is 29-6 while being 16-6 in the UFC. Son, we'll kick this one off with you. What are your thoughts on this fight?
I guess initial thought is anytime I see Sean Strickland at plus money, I will always hammer that bet. I'm not going against Sean Strickland here. It is going to be a tough one. I have a tough time seeing him, lose the same fight to the same guy twice, though, especially with how high level of a striker he is, especially with how the last fight went, which arguably he won. I had money on him last fight, so I definitely think he won. A lot, just significant strike wise, he beat him in every single round, maybe except for round 4 or one of the rounds. I couldn't tell you which one. But, not only am I a huge fan of Strickland, but this dude's just, got a great team around him. He's been training with Alex Pereira for years now, pretty much since he got knocked out by him on Platon's light heavyweight title run, middleweight title run. And, that camp is great. He's got Glover there. He's got Alex there. And yeah, again, I don't see him losing the same fight twice, especially being that, he won that first fight. I think Strickland gets that belt back this weekend.
Yeah, son, it's funny. I agree with you. And I think I do like Sean Strickland as a fighter. I guess the only thing that worries me here is I don't know if it's like refusal, to like mix it up at times, or like his coaches will draw out a game plan for him, like they did with Izzy. They said like, go in there, you got to wrestle him, put the pressure on, which he did. He backed him down the entire fight. But that entire camp focused on him wrestling. Only struck, never shot a takedown, which is an aspect of Sean Strickland that I love. At the same time, it gets kind of scary. But then again, in the beginning of the year when we did our end-of-year champions predictions pod, I kind of backed myself into a corner by saying he was going to beat Dricus and then beat Khamzat and finish the year as champion at middleweight. I did bet on that at like plus 750. So I got to ride with my boy Sean here. Either I'm the biggest dumbass in the world or the luckiest motherfucker here. So let's go, Sean.
You guys are going to leave me stranded on an island. Give me DDP. I have made the mistake of repeatedly betting against this guy, and it's burnt me every single time I've done it. I had Izzy. I had Strickland. I had Whitaker. And I'm not making that mistake again. Well, the guy does look ugly while fighting, and he gets compared to a blind squirrel, I think, pretty frequently, more than I've ever heard any fighter compared to a blind squirrel. He is able to mix his game up very well. He mixes in the wrestling very well. He does have a lot of power in his hands. We see, even in that Strickland fight, he probably landed the heavier in those exchanges, while Strickland did outvolume him by a pretty large amount. But I see the guy with the belt, with the momentum, who just took out a legend. I see him continuing that on and racking up another title defense here. And also just looking into the future, I think DDP is a much better stylistic matchup against Khamzat than Strickland is. And I personally, as a fan, want to see that DDP-Khamzat fight opposed to that Strickland-Khamzat fight. So that might be weighing into my decision a little bit. But I like DDP to win this fight, and I think he gets it done in a more dominant fashion than the last time. But minus 210, I don't like minus 210. I would have liked DDP at minus 150. If he was minus 150, I'd probably bet that straight. I'm not buying him up to minus 210 straight. Maybe I'll parlay him with Zhang Weili. Depending on my night's going, if I'm down, especially even more so, I'll parlay him with Zhang Weili. But I do like DDP to get the job done here and retain his belt and then move on to that Hamzat fight half a year down the line or whatever that ends up being.
Yeah, you do make good points, and I don't, to I guess back you up and maybe save myself some skin. If Strickland does win, I don't think it's in a crazy fashion. I don't think he knocks him out. I'm not looking for a finish here. I think it is going to be an out point. He's gonna get those strikes in when he needs to. But yeah, I mean, DDP is a tough guy to root. Easy guy to root against, tough guy to win against. I would love to see him lose. I guess I'm kind of a DDP hater ever since he started climbing up the ladder. But he has been impressive in his fights. I don't think he's had any fights where I've been bored or hated watching the fight. But I think I think the culture needs a Sean Strickland win here. Izzy just lost. Robert Whittaker got his jaw pulverized. Vittori hasn't been seen in years. That kind of era of fighters is hanging on by a thread right now. And nothing would make me happier than a Sean Strickland win here. And I think the UFC and MMA community agree.
Yes, and I do agree with you on everything you just said. And I just want to bring up, I think that fight gets scored completely differently. And I don't know, I'm not going to argue whether or not it was a headbutt that split Sean Strickland open, if it was an elbow. I've seen arguments pointing both ways, but without that damage in round 3 or 4, that round goes to Strickland and he defends his belt unanimously. So that close of a fight for what it was a potential foul to get it taken away from you, I got Sean Strickland winning this one.
Yeah, that is a tough way for the champ to lose his belt as well, because you always have that saying where it's like, oh, you got to go in and beat the champ, but that just doesn't really seem to be a thing anymore. But it will be interesting to see how certain stuff is scored in this fight, because if it goes to I see this fight likely going to a decision, and it's like, are you going to weigh a takedown more or the volume more? What comes in? Who's judging it? Who's scoring it? And it's always confusing trying to figure out how fights are being scored that night. It seems different week in and week out. So yeah, this one will likely be up to the judges, and it'll be dictated by how they're scoring throughout the night, I feel.
Yeah, dude, not saying that crowds really sway judges, but Sean's the crowd favorite here. Australia loves him. They cheer for him. He was able to turn them all against Izzy, which is nuts to watch live. So once again, I think everything here is besides DDP standing across the octagon is riding in Sean's favor, and I think the stars are going to align, and Strickland's going to bring that belt back to America, much needed.
Yeah.
We shall see. We shall see. But for all you listening, coming out soon, we will also have an interview coming out with professional boxer, San's coach. That should be a fun one. Excited to get out for you guys. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and excited to watch this card.